Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon. We are going to give it just a couple minutes for folks to log on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Hey, everyone. We are going to give it just a few more seconds for folks to log on since we are still having the participant count shoot up. So thank you so much for joining. We are going to get started in just a second. All righty, let's jump on in and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon. My name is Kim Johnson. I'm the policy manager with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and this, of course, is our national HoUSed campaign call. Thank you for joining for the first call of the new year. Happy New Year to everyone, and I hope 2025 is treating everyone well so far. Before we jump in and get started, I did just want to pause for a second to acknowledge the devastation that has been brought to many people, families, and communities in Los Angeles as a result of the wildfires. Our hearts are with you all, and NLIHC is here to offer our support as communities rebuild. NLIHC, of course, runs the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition. My colleague Noah Patton is in charge of that, and they do an amazing job helping to coordinate housing recovery efforts in disaster-impacted communities, and in the broader scheme of things, in advocating for changes to the nation's disaster response to ensure an official and equitable recovery. So my colleague, I believe, is going to be dropping information in the chat on how you can reach out to the DHRC. And it looks like we might need to make a little adjustment to allow everyone to chat. Okay, there we go. I think we just figured out the chat. So you should be able to use the chat now. And if someone could post Noah's, there we go. Thank you, Elena. Posting Noah's contact information in the chat for folks to get in contact. So just wanted to start out by saying that. But without further ado, we'll jump on in. Today, we are lucky to be joined by my colleagues at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities for Appropriations 101. This is an often requested topic for our national calls, an explainer of the federal appropriations process, which can often be opaque and confusing. So we have some experts on board to help us navigate that opaque and confusing process and answer questions. We have Zach Brown, Senior Manager for Government Affairs at the Center, and David Reich, Senior Fellow at the Center, joining. Eileen Stein ended up double booked and is on another call, doing her thing. But we are very, very happy to have Zach and David with us. After they provide that ground setting, I'm going to be going over threats to the federal threats to federal funding for housing and homelessness assistance that we see coming down the pike in FY26. And we are going to invite Elizabeth Glidden, Deputy Executive Director of the Minnesota Housing Partnership, on to talk about how they make their voices heard and engage their members of Congress on federal issues from a state level. So without further ado, we'll take the next slide, and it is my pleasure to welcome David and Zach from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities to talk about the appropriations process. David and Zach, thank you so much for joining.
And Kim, thank you so much for having us. Let's see, has the PowerPoint started?
Looks like it's going.
I can't see on. Oh, analyze screen. Okay, sorry, apologies everybody. Welcome to Appropriations 101. Like Kim said, but I promise that only the first 40 or 50 slides will be opaque and confusing, and after that, very smooth sailing. Next slide. Just starting out very, very basic. We're going to first go through some very basic federal budget concepts. We're going to go through federal spending, some trends, and also David's here from the center as well. Is going to take you through the federal budget from the very beginning with the president's budget all the way to the final package that will hopefully pass at the end of a fiscal year to go into a budget. And then 3, I'll kind of give you more of like a general outlook of the kind of fights that we're looking for in this next go around in 2025. And so next slide, please. And so the first thing you have to know is that the federal budget is divided into essentially 3 different ways. So you have the discretionary programs, which is what we're going to be mostly talking about today, or essentially committees have to come together and figure out the exact amount of spending that they're going to use for particular programs, and that's the cap on it. But with mandatory programs, it's essentially that everybody who is legally who matches like the qualifications for a certain program, they are entitled to actually enjoy those benefits. So we're talking about Social Security, talking about Medicaid, and in order to actually change how that actually works, Congress would have to go in and change the actual authorizing language on that program. Without doing that, that's the program is going to be set as far as spending just based off population of who qualifies for that program. On the interest on the debt, essentially whenever there is a deficit as far as when the revenues don't match what is actually being spent, in order to fill that gap, the government borrows that money. And so interest on the debt is basically essentially just paying interest on that debt from the money that's being borrowed in order to fund the government in that gap of deficit. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this chart just basically shows, the kind of the pie chart of how the federal spending usually goes. Like as you can see, mandatory spending, so Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, is the brunt of our spending in the budget, and then discretionary spending, much less, and then the net interest, much less than that. And this has basically been a trend that's kind of been persistent for last like 30, 40 years. So it's been a pretty main set. And the next slide. And this more or less goes through it through program. As you can see, especially with housing, like we're mostly going to be talking about this piece of the pie right here, the 14%. But as you can see, it's still a pretty sizable chunk in comparison to the other programs that are spent through the budget. And then next slide. And this is another chart that kind of goes through all of the different NDD funding. And so for housing programs, we're going to be looking at that 16%. And so economic security and social services, again, it's kind of the housing parts of that, the HUD parts of that are even smaller percentage, but that's kind of where we're looking at as far as the chunk of the funding that we're going to be talking about and meeting with committees to try to get more funding for. So next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Sorry. Great. So this is what I was explaining earlier about when there is that gap in revenue and in spending, that's when you borrow to fill that gap. And that's what I was talking about earlier with paying interest on the debt as far as a crucial part of spending. As you can see, like when spending 5.9 trillion, you also have to spend 892 billion to pay the interest on the loans. And then with financing, just in order to actually fund the government further, you have the revenue of 4.9 trillion, then you have to borrow 1.9 trillion to fill that gap. And so in successive years, you'll still be paying interest on that debt. And then next slide. And like I was saying before, like the trends of where we are generally with spending and revenue. I know that everyone on the news like to say this is like these are very recent types of changes that are going on, but really, as you can see from the graph, like it's not too out of the ordinary. And if you look at 2020, obviously we all know what happened in 2020, so that that definitely explains the spike. And so listening to rhetoric that tries to use that spike as a kind of uh, as a kind of way for people to say that we shouldn't be spending so much, like we spent in order to take ourselves out of the pandemic, but also, with a lot of the programs that got expanded, we saw ways that expanded spending could actually benefit people all across the country. And so definitely just wanted to show the timeline of how spending is usually going last like 40 years or so, and where it's projected. And next slide. And again, this is explaining that that deficit is the gap between what the government is spending minus the money it's collecting, and then we're continuing to you pay the interest on that debt as time goes on. And question on the very first part. I know the very first part was very, very general. And then David is going to come in and give you the exact timeline of where things go from start to finish. But this is a very general first start. So any questions on this, kind of the baby steps of the budget process so far?
It looks like we don't have any that have come in through the Q&A yet. So you can keep on going and we'll circle back if any pop up.
And actually, I will swing it over to David for this next part.
Okay, see what I could do with this. I don't know. But well, just look at the title of this chart here. Federal budget process. If we were meeting 50 years ago, that probably would have been a rather strange term. Process? Well, yeah, we passed some appropriation bills and some other spending bills, and we got tax bills and so forth, but we don't really have an overall process. But in the 70s, there was a push in Congress to have more capacity to do budgeting, to have a way of coming up with a coherent policy that meets whatever objectives the Congress wishes to meet in terms of fiscal policy, among other reasons, because in the mid 70s with the Nixon administration, we're dealing with a rather aggressive administration that wished to assert its primacy, and among other things, was so bold as to propose to impound and not spend funds. Glad we haven't heard about that since. So, the what we're talking about here is basically the process that was put in place with the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, and here we have 4 boxes that sort of encapsulate this process. Starting at the left side, the president's budget. The president has always had the ability to put forward a coherent overall budget proposal, taxes, spending, etc., through his annual budget submission. But of course, the president cannot enact that policy, at least not without the help of the Congress. So that gets us to the next slide, if we could. How about one more? Let's go to congressional budget resolution. Uh, that was the system that was developed in the 74 Act to create an overall create the capacity for Congress to create an overall budget plan. The budget resolution sets targets for total spending. It sets targets for spending by major category. It sets targets for revenues and, of course, targets for deficits once you've got your spending and revenue targets. And it contains some mechanisms for actually implementing that plan. Now, the targets which are set in a budget resolution are enforceable to varying degrees, depending on what sort of targets we're talking about, and we won't get off into that. But the basic, when we look at the mechanisms for actually implementing this plan, there were fundamentally 2 of them, and this calls for another slide. Next slide, please. One of them is the budget reconciliation process created by that 1974 Budget Act. And the idea is that it's a way to coordinate action throughout the Congress on an overall budget plan, specifically the budget plan set in the budget resolution. The budget resolution in reconciliation is not required. It doesn't have to be a feature of every year's budget resolution. It's optional. But when it does, the resolution contains directives to the relevant spending and revenue committees, telling them to report changes to laws under their jurisdiction that would produce a certain amount of changes in revenues and in spending. And the budget committees, the House and Senate budget committees, receive these recommendations, package them into an overall piece of legislation without substantive change, and hopefully they end up being enacted, unless they're a bad idea. The reconciliation has some real procedural advantages. The most important procedural advantage is that it is not subject to a filibuster in the Senate. There are time limits on debate. There are limits on amendments that can't be filibustered, though the discussion can go on for a fairly long time. But in exchange for the freedom from filibuster, there are some pretty specific rules that must be followed in terms of what can be in a reconciliation process. Extraneous material, in the words of Senator Byrd, the late Senator Byrd, who contributed to this process, a set of amendments to the Budget Act called now the Byrd Rules that limit the content of reconciliation. The other piece that the budget resolution creates, well, it doesn't create it, but deals with appropriations. Of course, appropriations have been the way Congress authorizes the spending of money since the beginning, the beginning years of the Republic. But the budget resolution also will set a target for overall appropriations. But these days, targets are set in other ways as well. There are, among other things, targets in law, which have come and gone. And as a matter of fact, there's been a general theme of replacing some of the functions of the budget resolution, internal congressional processes, with some things in statute, though particularly limits on appropriations. And what else is there to be said about the appropriations process? Well, as the slide says, 12 subcommittees, 12 bills, tendency to package them these days, or they might start out with the House or Senate moving separately, and then they're being combined into a couple of packages, minibuses, one package omnibus, and various other possible configurations. And then, of course, appropriation bills are annual. Appropriation bills, with some exceptions, provide budget authority appropriations that expire at the end of the fiscal year. And of course, the new appropriations are supposed to be in place at that time. As you know, they often aren't. And so we get a continuing resolution, which says basically, all right, executive, keep spending at roughly the same levels with various adjustments and so forth until we get regular bills, which is where, as you know, the government currently is. And I think this is about okay. The last slide in this deck is beginning the fiscal year, October 1st, etc. And what really happens? Yeah, deadlines are not so much deadlines, fiscal year ends on September 30th. Typically these days appropriations are not in place. And I think hopefully we will get some appropriations in place before too long. And it's the end of thumbnail sketch about the appropriations and budget process. So I think it is, well, we can ask questions or back to Zach.
Yeah, we did have a question come in for you, David. So just talking about kind of the cycle that we're in right now of Congress failing to meet its deadline and running on a continuing resolution. How do we get out of this kind of cycle of continuing to run on a CR? Is there, it doesn't seem that there's an easy answer, but would love your thoughts.
Well, Congress needs to just stop. And of course, how that is brought about is a mystery. These habits of inertia have kind of become a bit ingrained, but also people care very deeply about these arguments. About how much should be appropriated. That really matters to a lot of people on both sides. And so there's a tendency to want to fight out until the last moment. And the last moment keeps getting extended as we get more and more familiar with with the use of continuing resolutions. I have no idea how we get out of this, how Congress gets out of this cycle. I wish I did.
That makes two of us, or I'm sure all 300 of the people on this call right now. So we have another great question from Kylie. For reconciliation, can legislators overturn the parliamentarian if they remove something from a bill? And what would that process look like?
Senate procedure on which I am weak. But I think, and others on this call are probably far more qualified than I to answer this. But I guess I would say that, well, yes, the Senate can vote to overturn the parliamentarian. I think that would be viewed as a very large step, and the Senate would be probably reluctant to take it. I think there may also be a feeling, it's a related comment, feeling that it's sort of looking into the abyss of this process being completely, uncontrolled, and no one really, or few really wanting to, or the Senate really not wanting to take that step. But again, others on this call probably have other thoughts on this. It hasn't happened to my, as far as I know, it has not happened. The Senate has not been willing to overturn the parliamentarian.
All I know of the reconciliation process and the Senate parliamentarian and Byrd rules I've learned from your colleagues at the Center on Budget. One thing I do remember, though, is essentially that if a point of order is raised against something in a reconciliation bill, it will have to be removed unless there is, I believe, a 3/5 vote to overturn that point of order and keep it in the bill. Is the best I can remember right now off the top of my head.
And that's a high threshold, of course.
All right, it looks like those are all of our questions for right now, so please do continue.
Perfect. So like David was saying, obviously right now it's January and there still has not been final FY25 bills passed for the fiscal year that ends in October, because we are stuck in this continuing resolution cycle as we talked about earlier. So that CR ends this March. So that's one of the main things that Congress is going to have to address in this gap. Is once they get through budget reconciliation and they put forward a budget resolution, we're looking at around February, they will turn to trying to round together a group of bills, a group of budget bills, so they actually meet the March 25th deadline. But more than likely, they will come to some other type of continuing resolution agreement, just given the timeline, just given the gap, just given the very, very small amount of time to get all of these spending bills taken care of, when they couldn't even reach a top line spending amount earlier, like David was saying. It's difficult to piece by piece. So next slide. Yeah, so just explaining that we're still in the CR period. And then next slide. Yeah, and just to kind of give you some perspective on, I guess, why Congress gets into this quantum continuing resolution, to show you the gap. And so last year, the THUD subcommittee, which handles HUD funding, they actually, both in the Senate and the House, those two separate subcommittees did actually pass through bills to decide how they wanted to fund HUD. And so in the Senate, which was Democrat controlled, they approved the spending bill allocating $78.2 billion for HUD, and a 10% increase over FY24 spending levels. Sounds pretty good. And then in contrast, the Republican-led House passed a spending bill that proposed 7.3% reduction in allocations, with $7 billion less than FY24. And remember, FY24 was already some type of continuing funding level from FY23. So it really wasn't even enough money as it was to fund all the things that we need in the housing space. And so they cut on top of that. So you can see where, like, it's difficult for these two, to reach any type of consensus to actually get a bill passed. So that's what happened last Congress. And then just the next slide. And this, you can't really see it from far, but this kind of shows just overall what the full, House Republican slate of bills in the last Congress showed, as far as a decrease in funding. So it would cut it 22% below the funding from 2010, which is, again, if you think about how much we fund the federal government, probably already was underfunded as far as the programs that we care about, and it was cut 22% below that amount. And so that's the kind of the spending differences we were talking about between the two parties in their negotiations. So next slide. And so these are the three possibilities that we're looking at as far as in the next year. So Congress could reach a top line number for spending, so they could magically kind of come together in the next month or so, and Democrats and Republicans, they can come together and reach a top line number, and they can decide to finish the bills in this very small amount of time between now and March in that deadline, which it could happen. Or around that time, around like a month or so, they could decide that probably are not likely going to have the time to, get all these bills negotiated, and they'll begin discussing some type of additional continuing resolution that will take them past the March 15th deadline that they currently are in. So, like we were saying earlier, it is difficult, it seems, for them to get out of this cycle of continuing resolutions and not coming to the table and negotiating. And then next slide. And these are just some of the main things that are funded through the appropriations process. So we're talking about housing choice vouchers, public housing capital and operating funds, and homeless assistance grants would all be different programs that would be articulated in these packages. And so, as you can imagine, in that Republican package that was passed last year, all of these things experienced severe cuts all throughout. And so these are the kind of things that are in play in the FUD committee. And then next slide. Another thing that's going to come into play this year, and David can come in and add a little more on this, is the debt limit. So essentially what I was talking about earlier, where if you have a gap in spending and a gap in revenue, you have to borrow on top of that to fill that gap. Well, we're one of the only countries that has we set a limit to how much we can actually borrow. Very arbitrary, doesn't really do much in practice, but if you go over this limit, you default on your loans. It's bad for, I guess, the global economy. It's just not something people want to do, to go over that cliff. And so it's kind of this barrier that we continue to have to deal with. And so right now, you might have seen recently, the most recent talk is that Republicans are trying to attach raising the debt limit, which is something they're going to have to do in order to get through any of their, any of the budget reconciliations that they're probably gonna have to increase debt limit. They're trying to attach that to, to disaster funding. And so if the disaster funding is going to go through, then the debt limit is going to be raised. And so debt limit is constantly just this political football that is utilized to get people to the table. And it usually serves that feature in Congress. I'll say that. Next slide. And then next slide. And it's just kind of just like some steps to get engaged. Like I said, the FUD committee is going to be the best first step for all of us to engage with. They're going to be the people marking up those bills. They're going to have hearings on these bills when they get marked up, and so submitting testimony, and also just when these actual votes take place. And that's when we have the outside pressure. That's why we have the outside body. We have people. They might have on the other side, they might have like money and lobbying, but we have people. And so energizing people around these votes and around these moments of time, is really, really, really important, especially with these kind of less stated, these subcommittee votes that maybe might not get the most attention. It's up to us to bring that attention to this process and let the people in Congress know that people are paying attention to, to how you're actually deciding where these funds are going. And so that is some easy steps to get engaged and just do that one-on-one. And I think open up for questions for me and David.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. So we did have a few questions come in while you were talking. A great question from John. What is sequestration and what's the likelihood of it happening?
I'll pass David in a second, but sequestration is essentially a long time ago, there was the FRA, and the FRA put on caps, basically saying that if we didn't come to a budget agreement within a certain amount of time, there are automatic cuts in the budget in non-discretionary funding. Now, the reason why it usually doesn't happen, just being literal, is that it cuts not only non-discretionary, I'll say like social spending, but then it also cuts military spending. And so usually that's what gets both sides to the table, because Republicans don't want military spending to be cut. And then most times Democrats don't want social spending to be cut. And so that usually gets around that pitfall. And so, but I'll pass it to David for more context.
Well, I'm not sure what to add. I mean, generically, sequestration is a process of automatic spending cuts across the board, though the content of that board may shift, where you're cutting a particular category of spending, but there's across the board cuts to enforce some statutory limit on the budget and on funding. And the relevant ones now, the statutory limits that we have come from, as Zach says, the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2 years ago that set caps on appropriations. Were the caps to be exceeded, they would be subject to, there would be an automatic cut, which is why probably the caps will not be exceeded. There's no point to just triggering a sequestration. And there are other devices that can get some extra money that do not reach the cap. For example, emergency designations, as you see widely in the Senate passed bills, though of course not the House bills.
Very helpful. Thank you both. And $1 million question from Cynthia. How will the newly created Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, impact the debt limit?
I have no idea. That is, first of all, this thing, the Department of Government Efficiency, isn't even a department. I mean, it is not the government in any way. And even if they were the government, it's not clear what they could do. But of course, what they will be is the motivating force behind an awful lot of spending cutting.
Yeah, great point. Thank you, David. It looks like those are the only questions that we had come in, and so I think that you all are off the hook. Thank you both so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise. And I'm sure that we will be, darkening your doorway again for more help as the appropriations process picks up.
Glad
Thank y'all for
to
having
be
us.
here.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And with that excellent grounding and kind of primer on the federal appropriations process, I wanted to take some time to talk about what we're anticipating coming down the pike for the rest of FY25 and for FY26. So if I could get the next slide, please, Brooke. Thank you. So first, our number one priority is going to be finalizing that fiscal year 2025 budget. Like David and Zach talked about, Congress is very, very far behind in getting that budget finalized, and they currently have until March 14th, which is just 2 months from now, to reach a final spending agreement for FY 2025. Again, like Zach and David covered, the House and Senate draft HUD budgets are billions of dollars apart, with the Senate providing significantly higher funding. And even at that higher Senate level, funding for HUD's Housing Choice Voucher Program is expected to come up about $800 million short of what's needed to fully cover the cost of Housing Choice Voucher renewals. And to be clear, that does not mean people who are currently being assisted would lose their assistance. It means that when a household no longer needs their assistance, rather than that voucher being reissued, it would just disappear because the funding behind it is gone. So it acts as a cut to the number of households who would be able to be served by the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And so one of our priorities, and something that we are going to be talking to Congress about, is fully funding renewal costs for HUD's Housing Choice Voucher Program. We're working closely again with our colleagues at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities to make sure we get increased funding in any final 2025 budget. Oh, next slide, please. And in addition to that full funding for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, we are also pushing Congress for increased funding for public housing operations and maintenance. This, of course, would only be a drop in the bucket compared to the level of need. We're pushing for increased funding for HUD's Homeless Assistance Grants Program, which are vital for communities to respond to the needs of people experiencing homelessness. We're asking to preserve funding for HUD's Eviction Protection Grant Program, which helps communities establish right to counsel policies in their courts for people who are facing eviction. And we're asking for increased funding for Native housing programs, including for competitive funds that are targeted to tribes with the greatest needs. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so looking forward to FY 2026, we are going to be protecting and where possible expanding investments in HUD's affordable housing and homelessness assistance programs. There are some conservatives in Congress who are considering massive spending cuts to anti-poverty programs, and that will likely include affordable housing and homelessness assistance programs. Under the previous Trump administration, we saw presidential budget proposals that proposed deep cuts to HUD funding, ranging from between 15% to over 18% cuts from the previous fiscal year. Those proposals would eliminate housing choice vouchers for between 160,000 and 250,000 households. They would have zeroed out funding for affordable housing construction programs, and they would have eliminated funding for the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, which helps coordinate the federal response to homelessness between agencies. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so our ask in 2020, when we start pursuing FY 2026, is going to be for advocates to make their voices heard and to use our tools to contact their members of Congress and let them know how cuts would impact families, neighbors, and communities. We have tools to help get in contact with your member offices about the importance of affordable housing, homelessness, and community development resources in your neighborhoods. We have resources to help people share their stories. There is a lot of power in personal stories, and letting lawmakers know about the impact of their decisions, both good and bad, is so vital in advocacy work. So we have resources on how folks can help craft compelling stories to use in advocacy. And we are soon going to be releasing an updated budget toolkit to help people oppose cuts to affordable housing programs in FY 2026. And I see a few questions coming in about whether or not we'll have a recording or slides available. Yes, we will have both, and we'll be sure to follow up to send this information out as well. And speaking of making our voices heard, I wanted to invite our next speaker, Elizabeth Glidden, to the screen to talk about her work with the Minnesota Housing Partnership and how they engage federal lawmakers on appropriations processes from their state level. So Elizabeth, thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. I'm trying to undo my video. Oh, there I am. Okay. Hi, everyone. Glad to be with you today to talk about some things that we have tried at Minnesota Housing Partnership and some things that keep us motivated in working with our partners and how we engage with our members of Congress. Next slide. And next slide. For MHP, maybe I'll just say first that we connect ourselves with our members of Congress, but we also often have a role in Minnesota of working with a lot of partners across the state and being a convener or supporter of other organizations who are working to influence federal policy. Just a short background on MHP. We have 3 areas of work or of our business. One is developing and advocating in the policy realm. Most of that is focused on Minnesota state politics, but we're excited to enter into the federal realm. We produce original research, and then we work across the United States with providing community development services that are focused on rural communities and serving Native nations. And you can go quickly through the next 2 slides, which are some maps of places that we have worked across the United States. Next, there we go. So we think about engaging with our members of Congress in terms of relationship being very key to this work and how we're able to advance our goals. Couple years ago, we were with a group of advocates who had invited some staffers from our 2 state federal senators, U.S. senators' offices to a meeting. And it was a really great opportunity to have a little bit of an unvarnished conversation with them about what they think is important in engaging with congressional offices. And one thing I will say that they emphasized was just we really need to be focused, persistent, and not be afraid of just continuing to kind of beat that drum, beat down those doors. Don't take no for an answer, in other words. They emphasize that these congressional offices, on the one hand, they're really tracking volume. What have they heard on an issue? How many phone calls did they get? How many emails did they get? How many sign-on letters did they get? And it's just like purely tracking. And that gets kind of juxtaposed with this engagement that's more the relationship building type, where there's a deeper engagement. And so this is where things like making sure that we are frequently inviting our members of Congress and their offices to all sorts of things, events, whatever it is that we can think of to continue to build that relationship. Frequency of meetings. Everybody's probably going to give you a little bit of a different opinion, but from these couple staffers that were giving us kind of more the unvarnished look, they were saying, you got to think of this in more than just a couple times a year of contact. Think of this as a more frequent way that you are essentially becoming a resource to your member of Congress's office, and you're developing relationships with the staff. And your goal is really to set up those two-way relationships where you're not only the one that's reaching out, but they are reaching back out to you, asking for your advice. Next slide. We have a chapter of Opportunity Starts at Home in Minnesota, and this has really been a very helpful way to continue to focus on building relationships at the federal level. This is a group of our Opportunity Starts at Home members on a retreat that we took 1 year together, where we got to work on our relationships with each other, which has been another part of making sure we're motivating each other and building power together. A couple of the things that we do with our Opportunity Starts at Home group is that we have regular monthly meetings where we're talking about federal policy. This has been a great motivator to just like keep it on the agenda, make sure we're constantly thinking and investigating what's happening and how can we impact what's going on in Congress. It also ends up being, those meetings end up being a great opportunity where we often ask our members of Congress or staff from their offices to come and give us updates. And so that just in and of itself has been a great way that we are engaging with our members of Congress on a more regular basis. This has also been a great group where we often are talking about how do we expand leadership. How are we thinking about expanding the number of organizations, the number of individuals that are comfortable leading members with their members of Congress, engaging with their members of Congress, and kind of widening the circle, so to speak. Next slide. This is something that's a little bit maybe specific to MHP and some of the things that we have done to build relationships with our members of Congress. A few years ago, I had a recommendation from a staff member from a member of Congress who was retiring, that something that would be really helpful from a Minnesota partner would be to have something that was educational for all the offices of members of Congress in the state of Minnesota on housing. And so we started this, what we call the Congressional Briefing on Housing. And I will say every time that we have offered this, we've done it, I think, 4 or 5 times. We may have skipped a year here or there, but we're about to offer one again this year. And we have had participation from every single office, from all of our members of Congress, bipartisan participation. And it's also a way that we often have brought in some key partners who have really important information to share. So we've done this congressional briefing on housing both in person in the state of Minnesota, where staffers traveled to a location, and we did that meeting in person. And then I think lately we've been doing it virtually, and that allows both DC staff and district staff to attend. And it's a nice way to start that education process, but also start that relationship building. You know, staff in these congressional offices frequently change depending on the office, and it's a good way to kind of get re-engaged and share something that you might have. One of the original research products that we have started to do is district profiles, congressional district profiles. We're about to update these for the current year. And so that's another way to kind of share something special with our members of Congress. Next slide. This is another something that we have done, which is that on an issue where we have deep knowledge, we've worked to really build relationships with our members of Congress around that issue. So Rural rental housing is an issue that is very important in the state of Minnesota. We have a lot of USDA 515 housing that is set to start exiting or has already started exiting, losing their affordability provisions throughout the state. So Minnesota Housing Partnership has been really invested in this as an issue. Kind of taking you through, we have been fortunate that we've had several members of Congress that have been highly interested in this topic. And so this was kind of a spur to us that this was a great way to engage our members of Congress on an issue that many of our congressional offices felt was important, even if they weren't on committees that specifically had to do with housing. Great way to also share with them some constituency issues. So over on the right hand, there's some things that we did to dig deeper into this issue. The picture is from a tour that we did at a 515 property. We invited multiple local elected officials to that meeting, which I will say I personally feel was also an incentive for these congressional staffers and offices to be engaged and come and attend that meeting. And we had both Republican and Democratic congressional staffers come to that meeting and engage. And we are consistently kind of working on this as a way to engage folks right in their districts. Next meeting, next slide. I know we're kind of closing out on the time. I want to allow some time for questions, but this kind of goes back to our Opportunity Starts at Home chapter in Minnesota. We have really tried to involve a lot of our chapter members in building power through peer-to-peer learning. One of the things I'll say that I really love to do with folks is role playing and finding ways that we have an actual experience of advocacy that helps people feel like this is something I can do. Next slide. And so just to kind of close this out, I guess my feedback to everyone here is that it can take a lot of energy to engage with your members of Congress. It is very rewarding. It can really pay dividends, but think through what do you have capacity to do individually or through your organization, because there's a whole range of things, and it's better to do something than to hold back and say, I can't engage, I can't do it because I don't have that capacity. We really utilize the tools that NLIHC provides, whether it's the action alert, which again, that's a very simple, quick action that you can get partners to take, doing the action alerts. And we heavily use their templates, their toolkits, and in trying to sometimes modify those a little bit to be a little simpler or specific to Minnesota partners, but it's really fantastic information. I think with that, I'm going to close and just see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was an excellent presentation. We got a lot of thanks in the chat for all of your work, and a couple great questions. So one from Jerry about what have you found to be the most effective tools and methods for engaging your elected officials?
I think I would say two things here. One is, again, sort of that regularity and persistence, trying to do more than just that one introductory meeting. And again, I will just say, if you have an opportunity to have a member meeting with a staff, not the actual member of Congress, that is gold. Establishing those relationships with staffers is just so amazing. And then the second thing I would say is just the power of constituents. Members of Congress really are motivated by what their constituents care about. And so we are a statewide organization. When I meet with members of Congress, sometimes I do it myself or with their offices, but often I try to look for other even more like hyper local partners to bring to those meetings. It's very influential.
Awesome. That was an excellent response. And then another one from Jerry again. How have you and NLIHC expanded into other states? And I'm thinking too about like the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign and how the work or your work around that has helped in your advocacy.
Well, with the Opportunities Starts at Home, I think, with other states, it's more just, again, that peer-to-peer learning. There has been a lot of sharing from chapter to chapter. And so that has been honestly super helpful just to continually be motivated by hearing what are things other groups have tried, what's worked for them. It's, there's a lot of just like, how can we keep ourselves motivated and energized and make this fun or something that we really feel motivated to do together. In terms of MHP, we are looking at how we engage in some other states. And typically we, again, have looked to how do we connect with other partners. And sometimes like on the rural housing issues that we've been deeply involved in, we have invited other members of Congress who have either authored some of the bills that we're working on to help be presenters at events. And that has been an effective way to engage members of Congress that are not from Minnesota.
Awesome. Very, very helpful information. And then one more question from Rebecca, and then we'll let you go. What kind of events are members of Congress most responsive to, especially for a new nonprofit with not a lot of advocacy history?
Yeah, and I will just say, I don't think you need to have that background of being super experienced advocate. Honestly, I think that there are so many different types of events that members of Congress are interested in. You shouldn't let that hold you back, that you're not having an event that has 200 attendees and you're going to have your member of Congress speak. They will come if they have time to visit your location, to meet with constituents there. So I think it's just, planning the event, planning some sort of reason for them to come. I will say they do like to speak. So that can be an extra kind of something that's an opportunity for either that member of Congress or their staff to introduce themselves and say a little something.
Awesome. Very helpful, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. And the only thing I would add to that as well is that your members of Congress are your elected officials. They're responsible to you. They should be responsive to you. And so don't be afraid to reach out, even if you're, new to advocacy or a nonprofit without a lot of experience. It's never too late to get involved, and it's always good to reach out to your members and start building those relationships. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining. We will have you back to talk more, I'm sure, about the excellent work that you're doing. And so just to close us out, thank you all so much for joining. Here are some resources that we covered today. We are also going to, of course, be sending out these slides and a recording of today's call, as well as a summary in our connection on Friday, as well as just the connection on Friday. But our resources will be available on our website. And please do join us for our next national call on Tuesday, January 28th, same time, same place. And we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you so much for joining, and have a wonderful day, everyone.